Interesting new proposal yesterday from Senators Tom Cotton and Mitt Romney. Don't have all the details. Let's put this up there on the screen. Senators Cotton and Romney are proposing an increase in the minimum wage, saying, quote, I'm introducing a bill with Senator Romney to give an raise by increasing the minimum wage and ensuring businesses can't hire illegal immigrants, protecting American workers. When you go down and you look at more of the thread, essentially what Senator Cotton and Romney are saying is that there will have a phased-in increase of the minimum wage. But ultimately, I think the top line news, Krystal, is they're doing something which not even many of the Democrats want to do, and they say they want to peg it to inflation. So essentially, this is a minimum wage for E-Verify swap while pegged to inflation. Obviously, it's dead on arrival. I have no illusions that any Democrat would ever vote for it, given the verify provision. But it's interesting because, as I've long said here, when you have no answer to the minimum wage, then you're obviously going to get clobbered. And Senator Cotton, in particular, if he wants to run for president in 2024, this is something which, well, first of all, obviously makes sense in a poor state like Arkansas. But second, would make sense nationally. And it does reflect that at least some people are thinking differently.
Yeah, it reflects that they've basically lost the debate on the minimum wage, and they realize that. Like,
and
I have to think that looking at those results in Florida was kind of an oh shit moment. Like, we better get on board with something here.
Right.
Now, obviously, there's a rather key detail left out of this proposal, which is, what are you going to raise it to?
Right. Waiting on the details.
Waiting on the details on that with very low expectations, and of course, they have to to signal like, oh, we're not like Bernie Sanders and we're not socialists. They've got to throw in their like immigration culture war thing to make sure that they're good with the right. But it is interesting. I would like to go back and see what Romney said about the minimum wage when he ran for president. But I think it tells you everything you need to know that his choice for vice president at that time was Paul Ryan, who's, total deficit hawk, fiscal austerity, made all kinds of obnoxious comments about, people being lulled to sleep in hammocks by the fairly non-existent and threadbare American social safety net. There's a deep opposition to having a federal minimum wage at all within a lot of the firmament of the Republican Party and the think tanks that back them. So, look, it's interesting that they've basically decided we can't, or at least some portion of them have decided, like, we can't just completely oppose this thing anymore. We got to have some kind of counteroffer here.
Well, it's fascinating to me. Well, I actually didn't even know this. Romney's been supporting a minimum wage since 2014. He actually went on Morning Joe, just found it. He says, I think we're nuts not to raise the minimum wage. And actually, in the 2012, so it was post-2012 run. Obviously, he's been thinking about a few different things, but it's obviously something that's been on his radar for a long time. The fact that he paired it with Cotton actually makes a lot of sense. Cotton is probably the preeminent immigration hawk on a policy level in the U.S. Senate. So the interesting dynamic here, though, is that, let's be honest, anything paired with Romney is dead on arrival for a lot of like the MAGA wing of the GOP. But it's interesting positioning from both of them, especially after Romney just proposed this big child care, child poverty and child care tax credit through the Social Security Agency, which is basically up to $3,000 of cash assistance per month to families, depending on the size of the family. It's a significant chunk of change and basically a total reformation of the way that we think about welfare, especially after 1996. So, he's essentially to the left of Bill Clinton in the 96 welfare reform in this proposal. Same thing whenever it comes to this, to the minimum wage increase. Like you said, look, I don't have a lot of the details. What they're basically saying is they're going to peg it to inflation and have the gradual rise. I'm not sure what the Democrat version is to 15, but it's a 5-year phase in.
The Democratic version is you'd get to 15 by 2025, and it's not pegged to inflation, it's pegged to median income.
Right.
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the numbers and get somebody who's more expert in policy than I am to tell you which of those varieties is better. But obviously, the key thing is we don't know what they're trying to increase it to, and you can have a situation. In an ideal world, you increase the minimum wage to actually being a living wage, and then you have what's called automatic stabilizers to make sure it stays at that level. What could be a worst of all worlds is if you increase it like a pathetic amount, and then you sort of lock that pathetic amount in place by having automatic stabilizers and taking the political pressure off to do better for workers. So the fact that we don't know what the top line number is, and I'm, not super hopeful that it's going to be adequate and where it needs to be, is a rather key missing piece of information here. But it is a really interesting shift within the Republican Party and also creates a bit of a natural experiment in terms of, look, the Republican Party at this point is basically centered around Trump loyalty. Mm-hmm. Does policy matter at all? Does the fact that Cotton and Romney are offering these more economic, so at least some head nods towards economic populist proposals, does that improve their standing with the base? And especially since you have Romney, who's very much not a Trump loyalist, and Cotton, who has mostly been a Trump loyalist, although he's sort of backed off of that.
He broke on the certification.
He did break on Stop the Steal, which was good to see. But you kind of have this experiment of, how does that change their standing with the base, or does the base really care about this at all, or are they just focused on Trump loyalty?
I don't think the base cares whatsoever.
No, I don't either.
I think the interesting part is going to be if somebody does win the nomination. Let's say if one of these, well, not Mitt Romney, but let's say it was Tom Cotton, or let's say Tom Cotton doesn't win but has some influence on the debate. The more interesting thing is this. So Cotton is on the debate stage in 2023 in Iowa or someplace like that, and he challenges somebody else on the minimum wage. What are they going to do? Whoever this Stop the Steal, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or whatever. What are they going to say on that? Because that's what I'm curious, which is that whenever it comes then to a general election, are they going to open themselves up to clips playing over and over again saying that they oppose one after Florida, when votes historically Trump, also passes a minimum wage at over 60% of the vote. So in terms of the paradigm shift within the party, I think it will be used much more as a do you agree with your Republican colleague type thing than really as some sort of flagship policy, but very interesting to see.
Yeah, and just a couple other updates on the minimum wage. Dan Price tweeted this out just on the facts of the minimum wage, because we had that CBO report come out saying, it's going to kill 1.4 million jobs. Well, the reality is, study of 138 state minimum wage increases since 1979 found no drop in low-wage jobs for 5 years. One of the other criticisms of lifting the minimum wage is that, it's not fair to workers who are just at, $15. Well, they found that pay grew for low-wage workers already making above the minimum wage. So basically, this didn't just benefit the people who were under the minimum wage previously. This benefited all low-income, working-class people. The other update that we have for you here is Joe Manchin being Joe Manchin. Of course, there's always been a question about, are you really going to push to get the $15 minimum wage, Joe Biden, through regular order where you have zero chance of finding success? Or are you going to try to do this through budget reconciliation, even if it means that you have to overrule the Senate parliamentarian? This is Joe Manchin basically saying, absolutely not. I won't go along with doing anything that doesn't follow the Byrd rule. I hate going into all this crap. But basically, that the Senate parliamentarian rules that it is directly and impactful on the budget. And again, the Senate parliamentarian is not an elected official who has really any say. This is about their guidance. And Manchin is saying, though, I'm going to go along with whatever the Senate parliamentarian ultimately says, which probably gives him an out from having to actually oppose the minimum wage and makes it less likely that they're going to be able to push this through budget reconciliation, which effectively means it's not happening. Yeah, a little bit of gossip I heard yesterday was that now what they're worried about is if they do try to do it, in order to keep with the Byrd rule and Manchin and all that, is they would have to defund Pell Grants in order to make that happen. So, yeah, welcome to Washington, where there's a rule for everything that doesn't actually make any sense whatsoever. Tomorrow on Rising, we got Don Calloway and Gabby Orr here for Team Rising, plus author of The Deficit Myth and Economics and Public Policy professor Stephanie Kelton's going to join us to talk about why means testing stimulus checks is a bad idea. And assistant editor at American Greatness, author of Chronicles of Magazine American Culture, Pedro Gonzalez, is going to discuss the latest on the legislation, the conservative case, he says, for a $15 minimum wage. Remember to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our videos. Don't forget to like and share as well, and we will see you all tomorrow. Have a good one, guys.